Welcome to another episode of the Sabastian Show. Today we have Coach Tim Adams on. It was a really exciting podcast. We're talking about everything from mitochondrial function to somatic release and what you can do to get back in your body. I think you'll enjoy it. I look forward to getting your feedback. Great getting to know you last week, and I echoed a lot of what you were sharing with me. There's certain people you talk to and you just feel an immediate resonance with, and so I was so excited to have you on today because I felt that way immediately, like there's an energetic resonance. Absolutely. And I love the work you're doing. I think it's really important right now, and I think we have what I would say a new generation of specialists coming on board to help humanity shift or rise consciousness that's going to be doing a deeper work where we talked about this some, but it's incorporating a spiritual technology where we're bringing the spiritual realm and science together, where they're coming back together. And I thought your story was such a great example of this. So I want to get into it. Yeah. And so, you focused on in your training. You said the word a speed trainer.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I'm gonna come back to this later, but I didn't realize that you could get hired to just teach people speed. Now I would get why, right? Speed and strength are both really important, but like that's a super interesting, very niche.
It is niche, but my field has been super niche. Like I've made a living off of really a market that's only 1,500 people. Like I for 30 plus years, that's the only group I have served. 1,500 people, right?
just
and it's
very unique to think about.
Yeah, it really is. Especially when you think about there's scarcity and all that, but the reality is like I've never thought of that there was competition in having only 1,500 people to serve.
Yeah.
And anyway, but speed was funny because I kind of cut my teeth in coaching at the Air Force Academy. It was my alma mater, and I had the opportunity to play a couple years of football, and then I tore up my knee. But tearing up my knee is how I actually got into coaching. Mm-hmm. And when it started, I was running from. I had torn my knee up as a freshman, and I was in a squadron that was it was called Attrition 26, and they prided themselves on getting all the freshmen to leave. and they hated athletes. And I was one of only a handful of guys that was an athlete in the squadron. And so they zeroed in on me. And when I got cut, I was like free bait to them. Like they just had a heyday with me. I didn't sleep for months at that point. And it created this disdain for the academy at that time. But I'll come back to that later. But what happened was I was like, I needed an escape. So I was pretty good in the weight room. I was good just naturally at Olympic lifting, cleans and jerks and snatches. And so I asked the strength coach, I was like, hey, can I come be an assistant coach? And they were like, what? So they thought about it. And the next day they were like, yeah, I think we could make a position for you. And so I started helping out. So I created a little wiggle room for me. And that's kind of when I started, and I at that time too I started competing, and so I would go down. My strength coach helped me significantly, a guy named Kim Goss, and he was phenomenal. And I also went down to the U.S. Olympic Training Center, and Dragomir Cicerin was the head Olympic coach. And that's so right. I was kind of learning from him as well.
Proximity is power. As we go through this, you're going to see how much proximity matters.
Yes.
Right?
Big time.
So and that was in Colorado Springs.
That was Colorado Springs.
Yep.
And so I'm a cadet, and I'm now learning from the Olympic Training Center's coach.
Which at the time was probably the best of the best.
Yeah. And
near the top.
And was he the best in the world? That's debatable, but he's certainly changed.
He's on a list, right?
Yes, he is, for sure. And so it just allowed me to, every time I learned from somebody that I considered the best, and interesting enough, that was one of my MOs that I learned in high school, was learn from the best.
Always.
And it took, and I got to say this correctly, it accelerated my ability to coach.
Yep.
And in that, it accelerated the results that I was able to get with the individuals that I was working with. So as a student coach, I was helping our players, and they were getting better. And so it was just like I had this like capability, if you would, that was a bit natural and yet a bit learned, that I started to develop. And then I got married after I graduated to a student athlete as well, and she
likely story.
Yeah, and she was a 5-time letter earner in multiple colleges, and so then I started helping her teams do things, and I didn't know what I was doing. I really was clueless, but I had the opportunity to come back to the academy to coach, and when I did, I was really good in the weight room, but I had no knowledge of speed. Like, and what we started to see is that we had our athletes were quick.
So what is the difference between quick and fast? Because if you're not an athlete, you're like, well, what's the difference?
What's the difference?
And I remember Kobe saying this. He goes, I was fast, but not that fast.
Yeah.
I was quick, but I wasn't that quick.
Yeah.
And he was unpacking his own skill sets.
Yeah. So quickness is really this quality of being able to start and stop and move over a short period of distance.
Yep.
Speed has way more to do with how fast can you cover a distance in time, and it would be more related to maybe linear speed, where I'm going 100 yards versus 10 yards.
So one would be more duration, the other one would be more response, or like your
yeah. So quick could be reaction time, but it also
time,
could
that's
be
what
how
I think.
fast can I move over 10 yards. And so someone who is powerful is going to be more quick.
Got it.
And so Olympic lifters are notoriously known for being able to cover 10 yards in a ridiculous
Deadly
amount
over
of
short
time.
distances.
But you get
But
past
endurance.
10, they can't
Right.
do it, right? And then now you throw in another word, in endurance, and endurance is not over, like, so for me, endurance is anything over 2 minutes time frame. And so now there's a spectrum. There's what I call a continuum.
Yep.
And this is a really fascinating point and that I like to play around with, is that we as coaches oftentimes compartmentalize what is a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And so speed and power gets compartmentalized, when in the reality is there's many trains of thought that say, well, you can't do endurance training for power athletes because you're going to decrease the quality of power from that. And
That's a common belief system. So
it is. And I bought into that for a very short period of time of my career. And from a research perspective, and this goes back to that many roads to Rome component, is that you can find research to prove it, but you can also find research that goes against it. And again, I think what is that, the Heisenberg, or what's that, the ability,
quantum physics.
Yeah, quantum physics, where you what you
Heisenberg.
intend to
Yep.
research is what you're going to actually come up
Correct.
with. So if you're
Yeah.
looking to prove something, you're most likely going to prove it, because that's what you're creating, right? And what I found was that early in my career, I was like not going to and I hated endurance. Like, I could barely, we at the academy, we had to run 1.5 miles, and I was like, oh man, even 600 yards we had a physical fitness test. We had to run 600 yards. Maybe it was meters. I can't quite remember, but 2 times around this 300-yard track. And it was like my kiss of death. Like, I could run 40s all day long, but anything past that was like, whew, running 100's tough for me.
Oh, I played soccer and hockey growing up, and to qualify for the soccer team, you had to be able to run 3 miles in 18 minutes.
Oh, geez.
And I would always be one of the last guys. I'd get under,
Yeah.
but it's a running joke in my family. It's all Norwegians, big Viking people, like very strong and deadly over short distances. But endurance is just, I don't run for fun, and I don't know how to relate to people.
Yeah.
And I get it's clearly a thing. But there
Yeah.
are people who run for fun and they get a high from it.
Yep.
I've yet to ever find a point where I get to the point where I'm high from running.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for me. And
So
I played soccer. At soccer, you're running the whole time.
Yeah,
but
which is fascinating to me,
it's
because my ex was a marathon runner, and so then I started running, and I got to the point where I could run 5Ks and 10Ks, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And the funny thing is, it made me faster
yeah.
in a shorter distance.
Going back to what you were saying
So
earlier,
now-
now the science that you were told that shouldn't have happened.
Correct.
So
and
it's like,
so
well, why?
And then this even got further expanded as I was on a TV show with one of my NFL players, and we were traveling the world, learning. And the premise of the show was amazing, and I love this premise. It was, you learn about the culture of a country by playing the sport of the country. And so he would go in, and we'd have a 10-day block of time, and he'd go immerse himself into the sport, and then at the end, he would actually have to compete in the sport.
That is so cool. I agree 100%.
It was amazing.
Beautiful. So you had to pick up soccer at some point, right?
Funny enough, we didn't do soccer. We
like
did rugby. We
cricket.
did played cricket.
Yep.
Did hurling.
Canadian.
Pilata. We didn't do any. We didn't do Canada.
Who does hurling?
Oh, that would be Ireland.
Oh.
Yep.
What are we talking about? Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking curling.
Curling. No, hurling.
Yeah.
So it's almost like lacrosse with a
Hooked.
field hockey stick.
Yeah.
And then he did like swinging, which was in Germany.
Swinging?
It's wrestling. It's like a form of wrestling. It's really an old school sport, if you would. Muay Thai, Prata Saray in Cambodia.
Okay.
Which is like Muay Thai.
Okay.
Dragon boat racing in Singapore.
Yes.
Surf life saving in Australia. Anyway,
what a cool premise. I love that.
It was
You're
amazing.
right. You learn a lot about the culture by their sports.
But every sport had a different metabolic archetype to it, and
So was that part of your work to help them prepare for these?
So my job was to keep him safe.
Yep.
So because was
he still playing at the time?
He was still playing.
Oh, I can't believe they let him.
Wow. It was because he was playing for a certain team that they were pretty loose with that, and he was fortunate. And so my job was to keep him healthy, but then the other part was to prepare him for the season. And so I found myself in this really odd, like always doing all this endurance work, and I'm going, I'm frustrated about it. And yet I started to see he was getting faster, and I'm like, there's something to this. And so then I started doing more research and going back to some of the speed coaches I had learned from, and started breaking down their protocols and going, it's a continuum for a reason, and having the mitochondrial density and proliferation is actually going to benefit your capacity to have an input of high intensity power output, which then, if you can produce that over time, will make you faster.
But that makes sense to me, and I think, and again, this isn't my area of expertise, but I can logically get my head around what you're saying. And what I hear is there's likely an inflection point, whereas if you're naturally a speed athlete, endurance will help you until it doesn't.
Correct.
Right? Where like you'll see like endurance athletes, they go a different direction. Like people do marathons for a living, I can point them out. You can just see it in their body structure, symmetry. So it probably gets to a point where it works against you, but for most, there's a lot of gain before they hit that point.
Correct. Yeah, and I want to be super clear. I am not training them in an endurance component. I am adding an endurance component in a stressed environment over the course of their programmed progression.
To increase mitochondrial density
and proliferation.
100%. That makes sense.
And it's, you don't need much.
How much, back in the day or to this day, how much do you pay attention to VO2 max in all of this?
I think, so now that's the other point. So I did a bunch of testing when I was at the Olympic Training Center and while I was at the Air Force Academy. Like, we tested VO2 max, and it was critical. And I got into it personally because I love mountain biking, and I was like at a place where I just started, again, running the 5K, 10Ks, and then mountain biking. It became a really important thing because my lactate threshold was through the roof, but my VO2 max wasn't as big as I wanted it to be. And then through training, I actually improved it significantly. So
how?
By doing a different set of work than I had been accustomed to.
To change your protocol and with the intent to increase your VO2 max.
Yeah.
Because this has always been a struggle for me. And I'm trying to figure it out. And one of the things I found out early, I picked up a very bad habit of anytime I'm under strain, I hold my breath.
Yeah.
Right. And I realized, like, what am I doing? And so I had to learn how to commit to breathing correctly. And that helped massively. I just didn't realize how bad my breathing practice was.
And I'm probably very similar to you because, like, when I used to run in high school and Like I literally couldn't run a mile. Like I couldn't make it.
I hated it.
I hated it.
I did it, but I hated it.
And I would always start out. I would just start out. Boom! I'd just run fast, and next thing you know, I'm like, couldn't ever get the steady state.
Sounds very familiar.
And so, what happened was when I started running with my ex, I would start out, and I learned this from when I started actually learning the science behind it, is if you go past your steady state too quick, your ability to recover to get into steady state is diminished.
100%.
And so if you actually start slow, you give yourself an opportunity to go longer. And then you start to allow yourself to build what needs to be built to then come out a little more rapidly later.
So I figured that out doing HIIT workouts.
Yep.
Because I would, in the beginning, I would just go as hard as I could, right? And the coaches would just laugh. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, yeah, here he goes. Mm-hmm. And I would fry myself out, and I couldn't get through the bloody workouts. I was puking halfway through. Yeah. And I'm like, what the hell? And then the other guys that don't look as fit as me are just like, and it's not like they're not pushing themselves. So I learned, like, oh, I got to find my zone first before I go super hard. And once I learned how to do that, I could go harder for longer.
Yeah. And this brings up a really interesting point that I learned from working with these pro guys where I'm trying to save my energy.
Conservation?
Conservation. Thank you.
Yep.
Woof. Conservation of energy. That these pro guys would put in as little effort as possible to just make it through the practice. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I'm not, but it's an adaptation to the environment in which they're in.
Yep.
So there's this thing of when you are training with the team, it's how little can I put in to make it through whatever I have to endure to just check it off the list. I would put them through hell.
Yep.
Like they would work harder than they've ever worked before. And then when it came time for training camp, it'd be like,
this is
the easiest training camp I've ever been to.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, of course it is.
And then, so you're pushing them. So when they get into training camp, it's easy. But what's your protocol, like football, which ironically, I made fun of growing up, and I was massive a hockey fan and soccer fan. And now football is by far my favorite sport. Yeah. It's not even close. Yeah. And I absolutely love the sport. I'm a huge Seahawks fan. But so it's a brutal sport, right? 18-week season now. Yeah. And I get why. And they only play once a week. So what would your protocol be in season?
Yeah.
Right? Are you more focused on recovery? How do you keep yourself in shape and also recovering between crazy games?
Yeah. So I take a completely different perspective on this than most of my peers, and that is my goal is to make it out of the season better than I came into the season.
That's an insane statement.
It is.
I love it. But yeah. I mean, I bet as a trainer, I'm sure your clients love hearing that. But
yeah. So then, and I condition them to have that mindset while working with me.
That's how you build a championship team, because you got to go all the way to the Super Bowl.
And
so you want to be at your peak going into the Super Bowl, not like.
So you nail it, and it's all predicated on how can you stay healthy.
Yeah.
And the goal of the season is I'm doing everything I can to care for this body, because the body, for all pro athletes, the body is their moneymaker.
Yep.
Like there are components to the mind that allow
100%.
them to create that separation. But if their body's not healthy, they're not on the field.
Yeah.
If they're not on the
field,
field,
they know they have a lifespan where they can compete at a high level. And especially for football, it's a lot shorter than, say, baseball.
Well,
and so you really have to get the most out of it.
The average career of an NFL player is
like 3 years.
It's 2.7 years now.
2.7. Wow.
10, 20 years ago, it was 3.7 years. Wow. 1 year. So it's getting worse, right? Yeah. And my average of the clients I work with is 10 years. Like they play for 10 years. And the reason is because I teach them how to take care of their body.
Yep.
And I teach them to think differently about why they're doing what they're doing and where do they need to be in conservation and where do they need to step on the gas. And it's a different game. When you can understand the game becomes different, then it's actually, it kind of becomes this play for them, right? And it's a game within a game, if you would. And so the key for me is keeping them healthy and then stressing them in a positive way in the moments and times throughout the week that I can to get as much as I can so that they're still prepared on Sunday or Thursday to perform.
What is the math that goes into that? Like, you're obviously dealing with professionals, and I know you worked with the Broncos, you worked with the Raiders, you helped the Kings get to their Stanley Cup, which is pretty incredible. But what is the math that goes into? Because, I mean, a lot of it, you really have to get to know your player, right, and trust their feedback. Or how do you know when you're pushing somebody enough or not hard enough?
Oh, now that leads us down to this place, and I'm really glad you bring it up because something that you're very interested in is awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I've joked that for 30 years I've been a wearable.
Mm-hmm.
I am the measuring device for my clients, and I've had
I like
this.
how you said that.
Yeah, I've had this uncanny ability to know where my client is, not only in space and time, but how they're feeling in relationship to the stress that they have received yesterday, a week ago, today.
That's incredible. So would you say that it's an energetic read or an intuitive read?
That's so great. Yes, and it's also like human behavior of really recognizing the cues of how
years of experience accumulating data on seeing how people behave with particular injuries or states of mind or physical.
And being able to get a feel and know of a guy comes in and he's tired and go, yeah, he's tired not because of the stress that we've put him through. He's tired because of outside circumstances, lifestyle typically.
Yeah.
And I just need to test him to see where he's at physiologically, neurologically, to see, can I push him today? And funny enough, oftentimes when they come in that state, they PR that day. And most people would have said, yeah, take the day off. And that was a day lost in their training. And my goal is, how can I compress the adaptation cycle? Because I want to create this environment where most people will only have a certain amount of stress per week. I want to double it.
Yep.
And if I can double it by the end of the year, that's why they can end the season better off than they started, because I have compressed their adaptation cycle so that the stress in a season isn't what it used to be. Is that making sense?
Yeah, 100%. I love this. So, and there was I forget his last name. Maybe you remember him. He was a running back for the Jaguars. Him and Mojo played together. Frank
Barnett?
No, Frank. I can't remember his last name, but I remember him talking about early in his career, he dealt with injury after injury after injury, and that was part of like the knock against him. Yeah. And he realized, and he got a trainer that really held him accountable to this, but he realized a lot of it was his lifestyle, his diet, things that he was doing outside of the NFL that was causing that. And so he got really serious about it. And I think at the end of his career, he had a reputation of being the exact opposite. He was healthy, stayed on the field a lot longer. Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't remember his last name.
Yeah, and that's, so this is a funny thing about the youth.
Mm-hmm. Youthful exuberance.
Exactly, and they come in and they think that they're invincible. And they don't think that they have to learn how to care for themselves. And they buy into the lifestyle of, I've got more money than I know what to do with.
Yep.
I've got more time than I know what to do with. I can have access to all of these clubs, all of these women, all of this, like.
And you need a good mentor or coach at that point to help you. DK Metcalf, if you are listening to this podcast, I need you to stop eating the frickin' candy, bro. Yeah. The guy looks like Batman. He's absolutely shredded. He's a specimen of a human being. Yeah. But he eats, at least from social media posts, all he eats is sugar. Yeah. I'm like, what are you even doing? Yeah. Which I guess if you're burning so many calories, maybe it's not as.
Yeah, there's that, but there's certainly this piece of when
we need him to stay healthy, though.
They learn how to become a pro.
Yeah.
They learn to make better choices.
Yeah.
And then instead of going out, they're getting sleep. And next thing you know, they're actually feeling better. And then when they feel better, they're performing better.
Weird.
Yeah. And it's, so then this gets to be why that 2.7 years is 2.7 years, because these kids go out and they think they're invincible. And next thing you know, by the time they realize, and I talk about this concept called compensation. And compensation is a form of adaptation to what's happening, and that your body is going to compensate to a point.
Until it can't.
Until it can't.
Yeah.
And that's when traumatic injuries happen.
Totally.
And so our body tightens, you lose range of motion, you lose a step. And then next thing you know, by the time you recognize that you're in severe compensation, it might be too late.
And I've described it this way. As a performance coach myself, I don't work with too many athletes, mostly executives, and a lot of it is they get to a certain level and then they top out because they hit a glass ceiling and they want to go to the next level. And one of the things that's holding them back more often than not is lifestyle stuff, which makes my job easy because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there where I can get a lot more out of them by just tweaking that. But getting back to what you were saying, I explain it this way, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. A lot of what we attribute to age and aging, where people say, oh, I'm just getting older, or that's age, to me, it's this idea of compensation where we have this performance vehicle. I could say it's like driving a Ferrari, but you don't really know how to drive it. You drive it hard. You don't take care of it. It will compensate for a while, but either through chronic or acute stress, it eventually begins to break down. And then we go, well, it's just wearing out. It was like, no, if you would have taken care of it, or if you take care of it, it will last a lot longer. So when I hear this, I think about this as an age-related thing, where a lot of the things that we attribute to age, I'm not saying age isn't real, it is, but a lot of what we attribute to aging has more to do with just not taking care of the vehicle, the meat suit, right? And there's, I think, chronic and acute situations there where it builds and then it starts to break down over time. And when we're young, we think, oh, we can get away with this because we don't feel it. And then one day, bam, we do, which is why running backs like 28, I think is 28, 29 is normally when most of them start breaking down.
And that's not just running backs. It's a lot of other positions on the field. And so this is a really fascinating, to me, this is fascinating because it's really speaking to the mentality of the human. And what I mean by that is I find with these executives that I work with as well, and the non-athlete individuals as well as the athletes, is they buy into this belief that they're working really hard, that they're doing the right things because they're, today in today's age, they're doing all these biohacking mechanisms. I'm doing, the cold therapy, the hot therapy, the pulsed electromagnetic therapy, and my red light. But it's like throwing spaghetti against a wall. They don't really they don't have the fundamentals in place.
100%.
And that's a piece that I find so fascinating, is that there's so many great tools and techniques and modalities and supplements out there for you to utilize. And there's so many supplements to increase mitochondria. So many. But you stop taking the supplement, and what happens to the mitochondria?
Yeah,
it disappears.
Yeah, it's not sustainable.
But you go out and you train your body to create it. It's going to stay way longer than if you just take something. And for me, I just think there's this piece that a lot of people are missing, is the foundational work required.
So this is part of my practice. There's a few things I want to touch on here, but part of my practice is, I love nootropics.
Yeah, me too.
I love biohacking. I learn it maximize my body. But then when people usually come to me and they're like, hey, what's something I can do? I talk about sleep and diet and exercise, the fundamentals. And they're like, that's boring. And I'm like, no, to your point, if you don't get those things right, all you're doing is using all of these biohacks to compensate Band-Aid. For not, it's a Band-Aid, and a Band-Aid on something that may need more than that in the future.
Exactly.
So it's like, I'd rather use nootropics after I've maximized on my sleep, my diet, my exercise, and then I add those things on top of, not in replacement of, and you'll last a lot longer and your endurance will be a lot better. But I want to get back to something you said. In your opinion, because I'm big on mitochondrial function right now and looking at a lot of different things related to that and just the little energy batteries in your body.
Yeah.
What is the number one thing you think you can do to increase mitochondrial function and density, as you talked about?
Okay, so
Two different questions. If
they
are,
are two
feel free
different
to-
questions, because I'm going to answer the first one. Is how do you utilize the mitochondria more effectively? And that is, you deal with the tension in your tissue. Like
By tension, you mean stress, or do you mean like literal?
literal tension.
Okay.
The tightness.
So you want to get Kobe beef like, where you're just
yeah,
your
it's
muscles are super
when
chill,
you're supple.
supple. That's what I was looking for.
And I use this as a test. Like if your arm is relaxed and you push on your bicep and it's soft and supple, which is what it should be, that's how every muscle in your body should be. But that's not the case.
So that's an indication of efficient use.
It is if every muscle in your body is supple, then you are efficient and aligned, and there are no misalignments in your body, because your body has the tensography, if you would, to be able to support your structure supply.
Which makes sense. And when you see people who are in an injury, and I can think of my own life, it's like those muscles they're locking
Rigid.
down. And then when they get rigid, you're also expending energy to keep them in that
Correct.
tensity.
And not only are you expending it, so now this gets to the point that there's not one person, I've not heard one person talk about this concept. And I'm like baffled by it, because it's like the highway. You're going down a highway, and you start closing the lanes down to one lane.
Yep.
Well, what happens to all the cars
back up,
behind
yeah.
it? You get backed up for miles.
Yep.
Miles. And now you're dripping a car through that lane. It's the same thing with the muscles. You might have more proliferation of mitochondria in your tissue and in your cell than anybody else. But if you have tension, your efficiency of that mitochondria is diminished instantaneously.
Understood.
And so I have that 11-minute routine I was kind of telling you about. Like, it was developed for injury prevention, but what it ends up doing is so there's this concept of joint segmental stability. Mm-hmm. And joint segmental stability has to do with your ability to utilize the joint efficiently, because the muscles that are small stabilizing muscles that go across the joint create the compression in the joint to allow it to move functionally. But when you have a spinal segment that might be twisted, rotated, or the foramen might be compressed, and the nerve root can't get the signal to that area, then you create what's called latency. Mm-hmm. And those tiny muscles don't fire at the right time. Latency means that a muscle that's supposed to fire first in the segment doesn't fire till maybe 4 or 5 times the 4th or 5th muscle down.
Yep.
And what happens is your body compensates by allowing the large global mobilizing muscles to contract to compress the joint. So instead of moving the body, you compress the body, and now you move like Frankenstein. And it's so common. You can see it for sure in athletics. You can see it really easily. But you walk down this hallway, and you can see people that are in severe compensation.
Yeah, in your mind, you're probably looking at people, and you can just see by their gait how they're walking.
Me,
yeah, I believe
right?
you.
And I'm just like, oh man, that person is one step away from having a traumatic injury. Those are the guys that bend over to pick up a paper clip, and they have a herniated disc, or they step off a curb and they tear their ACL, or they step backwards and pop an Achilles.
Yep.
Like, that's the rigidity of that tissue diminishes the efficiency of the mitochondria, right? So that would be the first piece.
Understood. And if I'm hearing you right, the other thing I'm hearing is that there is some pretty incredible design elements to the body, because if I'm correct, the response is really meant to be a protective one.
Correct.
To help the joint. It just, humans are not conscious of this, and so they continue to try to move without. Yeah,
and you brought it up. The consciousness, the awareness of it, we stop. So it's a funny thing. Pain is a funny thing. And like, I don't blame my athletes for this, because, as a football player, every time you hit someone, it's like being in a car accident.
Yeah.
And they're playing
it's crazy.
Somewhere between 30 to 70 plays a game, and they're hitting most of those plays.
Yep.
So that's like 30 car accidents in a 3-hour period. How is it that they can even walk the next day? Most of them can't.
Yep.
And so like, to overcome that, you have to dissociate from the pain. And there is if you do a PET scan, you do the neural feedback of the brain, you'll see that there ends up being a wall, a black hole between the prefrontal cortex and the rest of the brain, because it's trying to eliminate the pain.
So that's interesting to me. So it creates a disassociation or a disconnect in order to deal with pain. So it's a pain mitigation tool.
Correct.
And pain, if I understand, is in the limbic system, right? Pain pleasure is part of the limbic system.
It is. It's a primal, most basic function of the body.
And your
right?
PFC helps in the regulation of that, along with your amygdala. And so you're saying when you look at a CAT scan, you can see a literal schism or separation in order to deal with that. And that's my understanding. Many friends that were in the NFL, and just from very popular conversations or relevant conversations, really see cannabis has been one of the ways that NFL players have treated that, because it's from a pain standpoint, it helps with mitigation. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a slippery slope. I'm not a huge fan of cannabis, quite honestly, because it inhibits drive.
Right. We see that over the long haul.
Yeah.
But again,
it does deal with pain.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's maybe it's a sucker's, doesn't have to be a sucker's choice, but I would say you see this with people who've been smoking their whole life. And I have friends that I've known since high school, and they've been smoking since high school. And you're like, you can see it over time. It's like it does seem to change.
And the cannabinoid system is remarkable because it has direct access to upregulating your parasympathetic nervous system. And the one thing I do find
effective.
It is, and it creates, talk about that tension that I was talking about. It creates an instantaneous relaxation of the entire system.
Yep.
And so from that perspective, there is some benefit to it.
So when I found I've used it, just as, sorry to interrupt you, but two things. I have found that if I do, I'm not a doctor, I don't play on the internet, do your own research, but I found it 2.5 milligrams or less before a workout, I'll get a little bit more out of my workout. It's almost at the point of it's like right below detection or just mildly in detection, but I'll be able to push myself a little bit more. And then that night, if I do 5 milligrams before bed, I relax and sleep better at night. And I think it is because it has a impact on your parasympathetic nervous system and allows you to relax. Those are the 2.5 for HIIT is when I'm sore and tired at the end of the week and I'm trying to get through my goals.
Sure.
And 5 is if I'm more stressed out than normal and I can't get into it. So those aren't, for me, things that I would use all the time, but I like having multiple modalities and multiple different things that I can choose to go to when I want to use them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like for me, it would be a last resort.
Right. Like a break glass situation.
Right. Because to me, if you learn how to activate your body, then you wouldn't need it.
Yeah.
And when you learn how to really, what I call self-care, and truly know how to be aware, listen to your body, and then interact with your body in order to care for your body, then the funny thing is you stop needing the opioids. You stop needing, at 25 years old, I had just got hit by a car on a bike and had just ruined my second graft for my ACL. And the doc was like, you need a knee replacement at 25. And I'm like, no, thank you. I'm going to try to figure this out on my own. And that kind of is what led me into this world of tissue work and taking care of the body and resetting the system, to the point where I've had 5 knee surgeries. I am bone on bone. I haven't had an ACL for over 37 years.
Wow.
And I've got 20% of my meniscus left. And I can still skip. I can run to an extent, but my knee will blow up just because of the bone-on-bone structure. But if you saw me move, you'd have no idea that my knee was that pathological.
Yeah.
And I believe that it's so functional because I do that. I activate my knee daily. I take care of that joint segmental stability of that joint and the joints above and below it to be able to function, right? Now, do I spend as much time as I should? No. But I spend enough to be where nobody could really tell unless you were looking or you were an expert at it.
And you see a lot of, this isn't uncommon, you see people who get really good at their craft. very often started with it was a personal solution.
Yeah.
And I like listening and learning from people in that modality because they're integrated typically. The truths it's not a theory to them. It's things that they've had to go through and learn themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that. And I didn't realize this until I was in my mid-20s, and it's still a practice, how much I disassociated from my body. And I almost found, it's going to sound very weird, but I dropped in knowing I was a spirit inhabiting a meat suit, and I found my meat suit annoying, like limiting. And so it was almost like I disrespected it more than I should have.
Yep.
And it wasn't until I got into my mid-20s that I started, sounds maybe wild to some, started having gratitude for the meat suit. And then instead of abusing it, started loving it and appreciating it. And so recovery protocols are a really big part of my practice now. But I recognize I still have work to like be kind to it, to not push it harder than I should. Because especially growing up in a military family, it was just like, go, 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 go. Like,
well, and I would challenge that too, from the sense of, it's not about not pushing it.
Totally.
It's about what can you do so that when you do push it, it's safe.
Well, this is what you were saying, and that's what I was asking. I want to come back to it because you're this idea that I can take an athlete and make them stronger at the end of the season at the beginning is just incredible by doing it, by creating the right protocols where it's the right kind of stress that makes them stronger, not weaker.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think that's what I needed to learn. For me, was just toughen up, push through it. And I've gotten a lot better at it, but even in our conversation, I'm like, wow, I still have a lot to learn here.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because that mentality, there is, and again, we could talk about like the developmental levels. You have to learn how to grind. You have to.
100%.
Like, it's part of the developmental process.
Yep.
So much so to the point, though, that you have to also learn when to stop.
Yeah. And learn how to recover.
Yes.
Right. But it's much easier to teach somebody, I think, how to recover after pushing themselves than teaching somebody how to push themselves.
Correct.
Like I totally almost agree. From a client standpoint, at one point in my life, I got asked a lot to work as a motivational speaker to motivate people. And I'm like, I'm not really interested in motivating people. Right. I want to work with people who are already motivated and help direct that.
Same here.
That's much easier to direct something in motion than something that is standing still.
And that's why for the last 35 years, that's all I've worked with, is the individuals that are already at the top of their game, who knowing this type of information and knowing how to actually like program and periodize the stressors so that it actually benefits you instead of breaks you down.
Yeah.
And then the funny thing is and it's like clockwork. I step in and I can make a shift like that to your system. and oftentimes then they use that amount of energy that they have and the increased vitality and virility and vigor to go out and party. And it's like, that's not what I'm here for. But they're like, I feel so good. I can go out and party now. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing.
Yeah. The allocation of resources.
Yeah.
So you worked in the NFL.
Yep.
With two of the AFC West teams. Seattle used to be part of the AFC West, so this means a lot to me. Yeah. And then I remember one of the stories you told me, and I want to get into it, and I want to talk about where you are now, but I remember I went to the Stanley Cup the year that the Kings won, but I remember the couple years leading up to that Stanley Cup, the murmuring among Kings fans, especially here in LA, was, man, we have such a good line. It was really two good lines.
Yeah.
Arguably the best in the NHL, but they couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah.
Right? They were having a hard time staying healthy. And so you were sharing, that's kind of when you got brought on.
Yeah.
And you helped correct that.
I did.
And I don't know how much you can share and how much you can't share around that. But I'd love to hear, as you came in, what did you see? What were you paying attention to? What changes did you help make to the degree in which you can? I get there's some things you may not be able to say just based on privacy of the team. And then they win a Stanley Cup. And I remember because one of the things that came out that year was, I don't think there was a single major injury. Yeah. If I remember right. Or it was just,
it's nominal.
It was like a complete opposite of the 2 years before that. So to me, that's putting your money where your mouth is, right, in your result. And that's a pretty incredible stat. So I'd love for you to fill in the blanks and kind of tell that story for me.
Yeah. So you have to remember, I came out of the NFL. And I think the NFL, from a professional sports organization perspective is probably at the top of it. And the only other, I think, pro sports that would very much be similar would be like Premier Soccer or football in Europe.
Yep.
And they're
multiple people have told me that.
Yeah, and they're actually ahead in terms of the developmental process, in terms of investing in their players and taking care of their players than even the NFL is, and even NBA or whatever. But like just from taking care of your athletes.
And there's, I mean, the money that goes into Premier League is insane.
Correct.
But I grew up playing soccer. I played soccer for 11 years, and one of the reasons why, I don't know if you want to say anything about this or not, one of the reasons I fell out of love for it is because the older I got, and I played hockey at the same time, which I think that was the transition. It kills me. I was watching football or soccer a few months ago when it was going on, is how players will hit the ground and act like they're dying on the field and then trot off like the hero when they get the yellow card or the direct kick. And it literally negged me out to the point where I was like, I don't want to play this game anymore. Because also playing hockey's the exact opposite. You act like that when you play hockey, they're going to laugh at you. Like, who is this guy? Right? So to see that in soccer, and I think that's kind of where I think I moved more towards football, because I'm not saying you don't, I don't know. I don't see as many crybabies in football at all. And it's part of it because you were saying you're getting into 30 car accidents a freaking game. Yeah. They're just tougher. And I appreciate that toughness. Yeah. And so I lost respect for soccer as a result of that. Yeah. And I see LeBron's getting, and no disrespect to him because I think he's a phenomenal athlete, but I see he's getting blown up right now for doing a lot of the same stuff where he's like, oh, and like throwing and to get the call. And I guess maybe that's part of winning for them is like, it's just part of the game, but it kills me. What's your thoughts on that? Side note, we weren't going to go there, but I'm just curious because you're talking about taking care of players, and then I see that stuff, and I'm like, oh.
I'm with you on that. I do, like, I love soccer.
Yeah, me too. And like, again, 11 years, I loved it.
But funny enough, I was a switch of you. Like during high school, I hated soccer. I was like, oh, those soccer players are such wusses.
That was it, right? The soccer players didn't like the football players and vice versa. And I was a soccer player then making fun of the meatheads. So I'm with you.
And as I went down this journey of sports performance, I fell in love with the sport. I think it's such a great sport. And
there's an eloquence to it that's beautiful. And I'm with you on that.
It's beautiful. It's just, I think it's like, there's a lot of talk right now about the NBA and how much time it takes to add the free throws in, and they're like, get rid of it. And it's like, it's just a part of the game, right? So it's become, that part of soccer has become part of the game, right? Yep. It's the theatrics of it. I don't like it. I don't agree with it, but it's just part of the game. So I just accept it.
It makes me laugh every time.
It does. It makes me laugh.
The guy trots off afterwards like, I'm a hero. And get out of here.
Exactly. But that they've created, and so now you talk about culture that's accepted that.
Yep.
Right. And that's, and it's funny that you brought up LeBron. Basketball, the NBA is creating a culture that's accepting of that.
Well, that's why I got out of basketball when I was in high school, because if you just make contact with a guy when he's shooting, it's like, oh, it's a foul. Like, get the fuck out of here.
And so, and now you
kills me.
And you bring up, you go back and you look at like
old school
Michael Jordan and
I stopped watching those after guys, Michael retired.
Those guys,
oh, I know. Bill Laimbeer.
You go up, you're going, your feet leave the ground, you're going to be on the ground.
Right.
Like that was just common knowledge. Your feet go up off the ground, you will be on the ground.
Patrick Ewing.
Oh my gosh.
Those big boys. Yeah.
Like it was like
different game.
It was a different game.
And the way Jordan played, I don't remember him. Maybe I'm wrong and I'm glorifying him, but I don't remember him being big on trying to grab the foul unless he made the basket and he wanted the but it wasn't like, oh, it was just he played around players. And that was the reason I generally haven't enjoyed basketball either, is for the same reason. Yeah. Like and again, I think I found my way into hockey because to me, hockey was kind of the best of soccer and football, right? You get the violence and the aggression and the speed of football, but then you get the eloquence of soccer, right? But I hear you on that, and it kills me because I don't like that part of the game, and it's the same reason I don't enjoy a lot of basketball. I like playoff basketball, but I don't like a lot of basketball for the same reason. And I saw what LeBron got blown up for in Denver. The guy didn't even make contact with him, and he drew the foul, and it was like, what in the world is happening right now?
And then you get into the point, it's almost like the Tom Brady effect.
Right.
Where, like, if you take him down, you're going to get penalized for it.
Yep.
And then it's like,
were you on the Raiders during that time?
No,
was after.
No,
I remember the what was it called? The
Snowgate?
No,
or
no, it was Snowgate. But what was it's the rule to this day?
The Brady. It's called the Brady rule.
The Brady rule, but I can't remember what it's called. I don't know. It's not coming to. But yes, that whole thing.
The personal foul, of the quarterback. And look, I think you should protect the quarterback because they're the heart of what makes
the
football.
Leadership. Yeah.
And this is the piece. It's like you look at the Dan Marino's, Jim Kelly's, John Elway's. Then you look at the Brett Favre, and even
you separate those two, because I would put Brett Favre in the same camp as those other guys.
The only reason I wouldn't is timing.
Oh, okay, that's
because he came at a different period.
Yeah, he was the next generation.
Next generation.
Although they played against each other.
They did.
97?
They definitely played against each other. Yeah, they Elway finished his career playing against Favre, right? And I mean, but that's. Look, you stay in the league long enough, you're going to play against everybody. Right,
fair enough, yeah.
And
Tom Brady.
Yeah. And so then
wild.
now then it's that next Brady and Breeze and Rodgers.
Yep.
Right? And then you start to look at where we at. We got Mahomes and
incredible.
Yeah.
This next generation, Hurts.
Hurts and Jackson and
I think Fields is gonna come on this year.
Too.
I like
think
him.
So.
My boy Gino, he's been around for a bit, but I'm excited to see him.
Yeah, and they're way more athletic.
Way more athletic.
So it's a different game.
Yep.
And
they're not just pure pocket passers anymore.
And so you go back to a Vic, super athletic.
Ahead of his time, right?
Athletic.
All those guys look up to him.
Yep. And so now you're looking at and we even had this conversation around Manning and being in that pocket passer who isn't as athletic,
but had crazy football intelligence,
some of the best ever.
Yeah. Could be a coach if he wanted to be. I'll be surprised if he doesn't end up coaching.
I'd be shocked too. Yeah. And at some point he's got to give back to that, and he doesn't have to, but the amount of knowledge he has, and this is kind of where I'm at in my career. It's there's so much knowledge that he has that so many people would benefit from, and it's a different type of knowledge than the coaches.
Yep.
And it's a knowledge that's way more practical. And that practicality is missing, especially with these young guys, is that I don't think that they are being taught how to think.
Yeah.
It's more if you look at college football right now, these young quarterbacks, they don't think. Everybody on the team, before the play is called, everybody's looking to the sideline. You're not even sizing up the guy in front of you anymore. You're looking to the sideline, getting your call, and then you turn around and the play goes, and you're not even, there's no more imposing your will on another man anymore. It's I just have to do my job.
Yep.
And that might be even a far cry.
Yep.
Because now you're disconnecting from the game.
To me, that what I'm hearing is we're Maddenizing, not John Madden, but Madden NFL, the football game.
Yeah.
We're turning the real game into Madden.
Yeah.
Right, which is essentially what you're describing there. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. And they're probably in line with it because they grew up playing Madden. Right, so I just play my position, but not imposing your will. Like old school players would have an impact on the game differently because they could impose their will on the game. And I would say there's a handful of those guys in the league right now.
Right?
Yeah.
And what happens is you then take away the decision-making ability per play of that individual. And the moment you do that, then why are you playing the game?
Yeah.
Is it a game?
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, it's just.
I love what you're saying there because I think you're right. The best players there's an intelligence. Like Jordan was incredible on the basketball court, but he also had a high level of IQ around how the game is played and understanding and reading defenses and knowing how to show up. That was incredible. Yes. And Peyton Manning, I think, phenomenal at it. I think Tom Brady's phenomenal at it. Yeah. I assume Aaron Rodgers is phenomenal at it, although I don't know that as much from his play. I mean, he's phenomenal. I just mean, he, to me, is in a slightly different class than those guys.
Sure, fair enough. Breeze, I think,
Breeze was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And a wonderful human being.
Yes. Exactly.
Very kind, good dude. Yep. But that's interesting that you say that. Okay, so let's go back to your story about the NHL, though. I want to get into that. So what did you see coming in? What adjustments did you make? I mean, it's some pretty incredible proofs in the pudding there, because what I want to get to is what you're doing now and why.
Yeah. So, I left the NFL. I just want to say this piece because this is an important piece of coming into the NHL. I left the NFL in a place where I did not get an opportunity to course correct some of the mistakes that I had made as a head strength coach in the NFL. And I got this, like, if I ever get an opportunity to coach in a pro team again, I'm going to do it my way. And so when I went in, I pretty much was like, I'm going to do everything that I want to do, and I'm going to do it my way. And I'm going to create a culture of work, of self-care, and awareness that I hadn't ever created before. The first interview I had, I got shown around, and I was blown away. I walk into the players' lounge, and they have catered with fast food, and I kid you not. And they had like
so wild to me.
Sugar cereals as their snacks, and they had candy and junk food. All it was just, I was like,
And you're like, and you're wondering why there's so many injuries.
well, and that was my first thought, and I was like, okay, this is like interesting, is what I was saying. And
Would you say that was uncommon, or was that pretty the norm?
The norm.
Yeah, yeah,
In the NHL, it was the norm.
yeah. Not in the NFL.
Not in the NFL.
I'm just like massive Hawks fan.
Yeah.
Obviously, Beast Mode eats his Skittles before his games,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then DK is eating candy all of the time.
Right.
He was
Yeah.
like,
And look, I can't tell you how many guys would show up having, and I the stories I have of guys showing up drunk,
ugh.
having been out all night, and then they go and ball.
What in the world?
It's not sustainable.
No way.
And those are the guys that they're just not in the league for very long, and they're relying on pure talent.
Yeah.
And I say talent, they're relying on their genetic
Yeah.
fundamental capability.
Yeah.
And if they would have applied themselves, they'd probably be in the Hall of Fame.
I got to trust that TK is getting himself a coach.
I sure hope he is.
That
If
guy
not,
is amazing.
Give me a call, TK.
Yeah, he's incredible. He's
So-
a physical specimen of an
He's
athlete.
a specimen. He's unbelievable. Like
It's like God was
watched him
like,
run his
let me
40.
show you what the physical human being is, the potential is. There you go. It's just incredible to watch him.
It is, and
But
I
hopefully he's
saw him
got
at the
somebody
combine. I
training
go,
him.
this kid is gonna go. Like,
He's special. He's ahead of Megatron right now,
is that right?
on pace, and obviously
Wow.
that's insane for
Yeah,
a
it's
number of
insane.
reasons.
So I'm introduced to this environment, and the environment is super important to me. Like, it's one of the things that I try to control, and I say control, that's a really bad word to use, because the funny thing in pro sports is they come into the facility and they'll spend anywhere from 4 hours to 8 hours, depending on whether it's off season or in season. And now you have 20 hours to 16 hours to account for whether it's in season or
Right.
out of season. And what do they, and so how
And account for, just to frame this, what you're saying is important as it is what you do in the gym, it's more important what you're doing outside of the gym.
it is way more
Well,
important.
and I talk about this as a success principle for people who are pursuing growth in business. And I'll say this all the time. It is important what you do from 9 to 5,
Yeah.
but it's incredibly important what you do between 5 and 9. What are you doing with that time? So anyway, I'm excited to see what you got to say here, because I agree 100%.
Yeah, and even from 5 to 9 before, right?
Right,
Like,
yeah.
And to me, those are the windows of opportunity to get things right.
So how do you influence a pro athlete?
So-
That's got to be really hard.
So-
more money
so-
than God is,
Yep.
like, he's got all the fame in the world now, and now you're trying to influence him to change his
Look,
lifestyle.
I love hockey players because
that's
they're
true.
salt of the
Yeah,
earth.
for
And
sure.
it was like I had some experience with some of the Avalanche, because I did some consulting with one of their coaches early on and got introduced to some of these players, and I was like, they're different. They're a different cut. They're a different breed than the NFL players.
Yeah.
And they are just salt of the earth,
Yep.
right? They're good human beings.
Yep.
And so I came in with that, like,
There is a different humility
fundamental-
to the NHL,
There
and I love
is.
that as a whole.
And so I came in with that belief system. I came in with it going, I think I've got that on my side, that they're going to be good guys, and that they just need to be course corrected.
Yep.
And so I came in with guns blazing, just so you know. So I came in. The weight room was, for lack of a better word, it was a shit show. and it was only like 2,500 square feet. And it looked like a hotel gym that had stuff just laying everywhere. And so the first thing I did, there were like 30 bikes. And I love cycling. Love mountain biking. But I also did not buy into that hockey was an aerobic sport and that their VO2 max was the most important part of hockey. I didn't buy into that. And I did a lot of research before I took this position because in all intents and purposes, I knew nothing about hockey before I got into hockey. I played a couple years in high school.
Well, you had mentioned earlier 2 minutes is where you start kicking to endurance.
Correct.
Well, most lines are less than 2 minutes.
Exactly.
Right? They're like, so I get what you're saying. I can kind of do the math here and go, I can see where you're coming from on that level.
So when I started doing the research, I could not find the proof that I need to spend so much time on a bike. And plus, seated on a bike shortens the psoas.
Yep.
And all these guys had sport hernia issues, growing issues. And I'm
that's
like,
usually an indication.
That would just be continuing to propagate the problem.
Yep.
So I got rid of all but 10 bikes. I kept 10 bikes because
now you got more space to work with.
I had more space to work with. Instantaneously had more space. I rearranged the whole weight room because when they came in, I wanted them to have a visceral, like, oh shit, something's different.
Yeah. You visually see the change.
Visual see it.
Yep.
Because and what I did is I created a open space in the middle of the weight room where I could do floor work.
Sick.
And so what ended up happening is the first day they get in there, everybody was like, what happened? What's going on? And then they see me and they're like, who are you? And I'm like, your worst nightmare. And so that first day I have this 11-minute routine that I put them through, and we go through like maybe 30 minutes of it, and then I take them to a field. Now there's a field a couple blocks down the street from the training center. And we go to this field, and that first day, I'm like, all right, we're going to do 500 yards of lunging. We get 50 yards in, and a couple guys are throwing up. And I'm like,
these are professional athletes.
And
50 yards worth of lunges, and they're throwing up.
And I'm sitting here going like, this is why you guys are at the bottom of the conference. The bottom. They're at the bottom of the conference. And I'm like,
I remember
80 yards in, everybody's seized up. And I'm like, okay, guys, back to the weight room. So we go back to the weight room.
I've seen enough.
Yeah. I was like, well, we couldn't do any more. Like our workout was finished at the time. And here's this piece of like the awareness component of the self.
Yeah.
Of these guys should have been able to self-correct, but they couldn't.
Yep.
And they pushed themselves to the point where they seized up. And then I'm like, all right, now I gotta fix this. And so I'm like, so we spend the next 2 months of, instead of 30 minutes, we're doing 2 hours of this 11-minute routine work. And I take away all their cleans, the Olympic lift of a clean. I take away their squats. No more back squats. No more front squats. They don't even have the range of motion. If I make you do this, or I even let you do this,
the risk of
you're increasing your risk of injury.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not on my watch. And so I'm like, I lay down the law and I create this boundary of this is what work is. And I'm teaching them how to work.
Are they coming in as a team or as individuals?
Or
small groups or as lines? How was that?
In credit to the GM, he pushed the guys. So we didn't get the entire team because we have a lot of Euros and Canadians.
Yep.
But we got probably 70% of the team, the first 2 lines.
Yep.
The first 2 defensemen
Yep.
of lines, and they were there. But some of the other weren't. We spent half a summer together, and it was profound.
Changed. Yeah.
So and in the entire time, they were complaining, nobody works this hard. And I'm like, that's because you don't know how to work. And our first game, so I say that, so that's part of it. So what I ended up doing is I now am catering organic food from a local caterer.
Yep.
I'm working on revamping and recreating the entire players lounge, and I'm
got rid of sugar cereal, sugar snacks,
and I'm bringing in different
Whole
supplements,
Foods.
and I'm
Yep.
bringing in the Whole Foods, and I'm bringing in. They're seeing that I'm investing in them and that I care about them.
Yep.
And I'm bringing in, nutritionists and sports psychologists and all these different experts. And at the end of the day, they're like, we don't want to listen to them. We want to listen to you. And I'm like, okay. So now I have to go off and, start honing my skill in these different areas to help them as well.
People don't care how much you know and they know how much you care. They know how much you care by how much you prepare.
Correct.
So now they're listening to you because it's obvious that you care about the result.
Yeah.
So they trust you.
And
So which propelled you to have to go and continually get better at your craft.
correct.
So that you were always on top of your game because they
Absolutely.
wanted to listen to you.
And
That's so cool that you had the awareness to know that and to hold yourself responsible and accountable to that.
Yeah, and like and this goes back to the beginning of when I even got into this, is like I've always been the guy that's in front of me. I'm like, you're the most important person in the world right now to me. And my goal, my job is, how can I serve you? How can I help you move the needle today? Not tomorrow, today. And my whole premise behind all the work I ever do is I want to make sure that you feel the difference, that you can actually measure your difference by either feeling, by results, by whatever today, not tomorrow, today. And if I can hold the container and hold the space to hold you where I know you can be, till you can be that, game over. Like you're gonna be the best in the world at what you do. And I did that with them, and they hated me at the beginning.
So how did you get buy-in?
I forced it at first. So I liken these pro athletes to 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
And what I've worked with some 6-year-old, 8-year-old kids where they didn't know how to work. So you have to create a bumper for them. Like if you've ever been to a bowling alley and they put up those bumpers for the ball, like that's all I did is I put up these bumpers, and anytime anybody went outside that bumper, man, I would nail them.
Yep.
Like it was aggressive. And I was a jerk about it. Like I was not pleasant.
Athletes are used to being coached, though, so they probably respond relatively well to that.
This
idea,
is why
right?
they thought this is why they hated me at first, because for the first 2 months everybody was outside these lines, and I was just like, when is this gonna end? Like why do I just have but I was on, like I never let them take an inch, not once. Whereas I was with Raiders, like they would take inches and I'd be like, man, it would take me like weeks to reel it in. And I could, like, it was such a great lesson for me to be able to then, like, because I came into the Raiders being paid by all these pro athletes to help them. And then when I got to the team, they didn't want to work.
Yeah.
And I'm like pulling my hair out going like, what's wrong? And I didn't understand the dynamic that I was in.
The Raiders organization has always had an incredible reputation for just stellar performance and professionalism.
and creating a culture where the players are in control. And so that culture is a tough culture to overcome, right? Whereas when I took over for the Kings, it was like they were super respectful. And they were very
relative to what you were used to.
And they were very compliant until they weren't.
Yeah.
And then when they showed up late, I'm like, that'll be $1,000. And they were like, wait, what? What? We're getting charged for being late? I'm like, yeah. And you don't get to practice. Go home and think about this. And then it's like, then they start showing up on time. And then.
So you said this went on for about 2 months.
2 months.
So what was the moment where you started to get the buy-in? What happened? Like, what was it that you were like, okay, I'm finally getting through to these fuckers?
Mm-hmm. I'd like to say it happened a lot faster. It took time. And unfortunately, it took till the first preseason game. We were in Las Vegas. We played the Avalanche. And during this entire time, I am working with the medical staff, the coaching staff, the equipment staff, the scouts, the GM, and everybody involved to get them to buy into, all right, before every game, I want to put these guys through the 10-minute warm-up. And they're like, oh, no, there's no space. Nope, that doesn't seem right. No. And I'm just like, I'm doing this all summer. I'm just indoctrinating them. This is what I'm going to be doing. I need your buy-in. I need your commitment. And they're like, no. And so literally 5 minutes before like this 10-minute window I had, the head coach comes out, Terry Murray, like, he was a visionary.
Yep.
And he was like, you know what, Tim, I think we should try it. So we did. I do this little routine, and the guys were pissed. They're like, no, I got my skates on already. I'm like, take them off. We're going out. And so we did it, and they felt great. We come out. We're up 3-0 in the first quarter.
Boom.
And the guys are like, they come off the ice after the first period, and first period, and they're like, fuck you, Adams. Now we have to do this every game, and now they finally get it. And the other piece of that is, I did get some buy-in during training camp, because during training camp, the coach was like, never has he ever seen guys stay down in their position through the entire practice and in their skate through ever in his history of coaching.
Wow.
And it was attributed to the work that we had done. And so they started seeing the difference. And next thing you know, the next year off-season comes in, we have more guys. And now they're not even complaining anymore. They're like, okay, what can we do next?
Yeah. And
it was this beautiful now place of buy-in. And now...
Turns out when you get a result, that's the wall. I don't know if you notice on the way in here, but that's one of my guiding lights. Be so good, you can't be ignored.
Exactly.
When you get a result, the conversation changes. And in the end, you don't really have to spend a lot of time arguing anymore.
Right. Yeah, and it was just this beautiful experience where then now they self-corrected. And now it ended up being the players started getting on other players. And when we'd bring in a new player, they would be indoctrinated by the players, and now I didn't have to do any of it.
Beautiful. And that's how you build great organizations, great culture. So when did you realize in all of this that you had a gift here and that you were operating in something that was beyond just experience? And you obviously have a lot of experience. You noted that, like some of the things you gained through experience, but through our conversation, you started talking about somatic release.
Yeah.
And I think it's really powerful. And I'd love for you to define what that means for those who don't get it. But as we started this conversation, I really believe we're moving into a time where we're going to integrate spiritual technology with science and really elevate humanity at another level. And it's people like you who know how to operate in those things that I think are going to be on the front cutting edge of leading and teaching people how to become more body aware, how to take care of their body, manage their body, how to understand the mind-body connection, and how to release emotion and pain and trauma. So can you talk a little bit about that? What happened in that? That was, coming out of the experience with the Kings, and they end up winning a Stanley Cup at the end of all of that.
They did, yeah. Wow. So I've always been intuitive. Like, funny enough, I had a imaginary friend when I was a little kid. I have never actually shared that. I don't really know what that means, except for I just know that I was different from that perspective. Like, I was just open to things that.
And you grew up in Colorado?
Actually, I was born in Indiana.
Yep.
And so my imaginary friend was in Indiana. Moved to Colorado and grew up there and went to the academy.
How old were you when you?
9 years old when I moved.
So Indiana till 9, then you moved to Colorado.
I was in Colorado through college.
And did you know, at what point did you decide you wanted to go to the Air Force Academy? Because it's hard to get into the Air Force Academy, right? That's a pretty amazing feat.
So my arrogance here. I wanted to play Division I college football. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to play for CU, but I didn't get recruited by CU. And I got recruited, and I had been accepted in a couple of Division II, Division III schools, but I was like really hell-bent on playing for Division I college team.
CU's the Buffaloes, right?
The Buffaloes, in Boulder. And so through the whole fall, like, we went to the state championship in my football team, and I was an all-state football player, and had been talking to the academy through that process for about a year now. My test scores weren't good enough, so I didn't get into the academy straight away. So over Christmas, I went to the prep school. So I got accepted into the prep school over Christmas time frame, and that's when I was like, okay, I'm going all in on this, and started training differently and whatnot. And I had a great first year of football
What position did you play?
I was a running back. Well,
Okay.
I was actually an all-state linebacker, believe it or not. I was at a small school, but I was a decent running back, but not a great running back. I'd rather hit somebody than get hit.
Yep.
And so it's not a good
So you're
equation
looking not for a running back.
But I was a great blocking back for the wishbone for the academy. I was a great blocking back. And anyway, I got off track here. So I'm trying to understand where I was.
I'll get you back there. Marshawn Lynch liked to hit things too. It did pretty well for him. But most running backs, you want them to avoid the hit. Seahawks like those kind of running backs, though.
Yeah.
They just don't last very long.
No, don't last long at all.
But just getting into why you ended up at
the
Air Force Academy in the process.
So, well, my whole point of all this is that, like, I had this gift of intuition that I used, but I didn't use. I didn't trust it, and I didn't really know what to do with it, quite honestly. And
why didn't you trust it? I think a lot of people go through this, right? Where they come in with a set of gifts, and they turn them off at really early.
Because everybody else was talking about logic, was talking about analytics, was talking about, decision making, and I felt like an outsider because I was just like I was the quiet kid. I didn't talk much, but I was always put into the leadership role, and it was really because of I don't even know why, quite honestly. Like I don't know why, but my first year of football, I was a captain. Had no idea why. I was a captain of our team on defense and in high school and I don't necessarily know why, but what I do know is that that when I trusted my intuition, great things happened. But when I spoke of my intuition, people got all weird about it.
Yeah.
And so now this is the reason why I didn't trust my intuition is I grew up in lack.
Yep.
And so I was hungry for appreciation. I was hungry for love. I was hungry for people to acknowledge me, and I was hungry to be part of something. And
enough that you were willing to subvert or divert your own personal identity in order to feel like you belonged.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the funny piece of it is that my skill set of this breadth and depth and density of knowledge around performance came from this quest to be appreciated by my clients. And so I learned speed because I wanted my client, like I wanted to help my client, but I wanted him to need me. Like that, it sounds sick, and it is sick.
But I understand. I understand what you mean.
But I thought that if they would appreciate me more and I had these skills that, well, they would have to use me because they would need me. And it was...
6 Human Needs Psychology will say you're looking for significance and probably love and connection.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's important that you're good at your craft enough that you'll feel needed. That is obviously a double-edged sword, however.
Yes.
But
And the funny thing is, for 46 years of my life, I traveled the world studying under the best, and I got exceptional at what I do. Like when I tell people the results I can get somebody, like it borderline's not believable. And I'm like okay with that. But at the same time, it gets to be this challenge of like, well, then what do I tell people that I do? Because I have all of these things that I could play in, all these sandboxes that I can play in that I've had the great opportunity to play in. But the point at which I really understood this was when I lost everything. So I was 46 years old, and I'm still in lack. I'm still a shell of a man, but I'm creating great results for my clients because I'm feeding off of their appreciation.
Yep.
And then funny enough, I'm in this space where right becomes wrong becomes right. I make some bad decisions. I have an affair. I lose everything. Like literally, I lose everything. Money.
Almost everybody has this story. I love getting to it. Almost every one of my guests gets to this point in the story because it's a crucial one.
And the funny thing is, I at the time I begged God to take it away from me because I couldn't. I was curled up in a ball. I lost all my friends. My dad died. My best friend died. Like people were like disappearing. Like I've always been someone who like has deep friendship, or at least that's what I thought. That's what I bought into. And these guys that I thought were going to be my pallbearers, one by one, bailed. And like when I had nothing to give them, they were like, I was useless. And I was like, what does that say about me?
So you identified, I would frame this for the listeners, you identified yourself as a giver.
Oh, big time.
Right? And your identity becomes around giving.
Yes.
The problem with givers is that if they identify as the giver, they don't allow other people to give, or it's very hard for other givers to show up in their life because I play the role of giver, and they can become incredibly protective of that because, as we talked about earlier, their identity is tied to it.
Without a doubt.
So if I'm not a giver, who am I? So if I'm the giver, you can't be the giver, and I'm using an old school reference, but it's like the Highlander. There can only be one in a social circle.
Yeah.
What ends up happening, and I think as you're narrating here, is you end up inviting takers, and they love you, they adore you because you are constantly feeding them. The problem is you'll become a martyr to your social circle, and then in the time when you need someone to be there for you, no one is there. Because they don't even know how to be there for you. Like, hey, listen, like I signed up to be the taker here. I don't know how to be the giver. And so it can be very hard. And then also what happens with the givers is they get alone, they get lonely, they feel lost in that world. And so then they go out looking for more. And that's how they find themselves doing things that become very destructive to themselves and others. It's seeking for more, right? That validation, that significance, the hold that they keep feeling. And it very often comes only when everything is stripped away that we get to see who we really are. And I could tell just from talking with you, you've already done the work here and it's integrated, right? So you have a lot of gratitude for that, not pain. Beautiful.
And that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Right?
Yeah.
And that's
Man,
that piece.
The amount of times I've heard people say
right?
this.
And like I would not be here today had I not gone through that. And so I'm so grateful for those missteps. And I joke all the time. It's like I have had and I've had people say, man, what a shit show your life has been. And I'm like, fucking right. and I'm grateful for it because it's given me distinction.
What?
Now I can see the bullshit that you're doing.
Yep.
I did that. I'm like, call you out on that easily because I did it. And I'm like, there's no judgment in it.
No.
I just know exactly where you're at.
And now you can help them.
And if you don't course correct, I know where you're going. So you have a choice. You can learn by pain or you can learn by wisdom. Your choice.
Yeah.
So
I'm with you.
It was at that moment that I was opening these doors that I was afraid I'd never wake up again. Like I thought I was literally going to die.
Yeah.
And I opened those doors.
Well, there is a death. There's a death of an identity that happens in that, right?
Yeah,
and so that does feel like, viscerally can feel like a physical death.
And it was at the moment I opened those doors and that identity died of me. And I really stepped down into this space of unearthing me.
Yeah.
That I realized that I'd been forsaken a lot of these gifts that I had. And then in the course of, I did some plant medicine shortly after that too, that it became very clear that my path was one of healing.
Yeah.
And
Would you do ayahuasca or would you do?
I did way more. I did ayahuasca. Yes. My first introduction was 5-MeO DMT. And then my second was ayahuasca.
I'm going to take my time with psychedelics. 5-MeO is like, you're just jumping into the deep end of the pool. Like, well, hey, let's just see how intense this can get, how quickly it can get there.
At that point, I had never done a drug in my life. I'd never smoked. And so this was in Guatemala and it was ceremonial. And that's the only way I would ever do plant medicine.
So you did Bufo.
I did Bufo.
Yeah.
And so I had to smoke it in a bong, the 5-MeO, and then the Bufo in a crack pipe.
Yep.
And I'm like, I had no idea I would even be able to get something because I was like, I've never smoked.
So for those listening, I'm not a doctor, I don't play on the internet. 5-MeO is literally the most potent psychedelic on the face of the earth, I think, currently. It's intense. So to jump in, why don't we try some psilocybin to start? No, I'll just jump into the deep end of the pool.
In context, to give some context to this, I was in Guatemala because there to talk to this medicine man about microdosing for an event I'm doing in Guatemala,
Yep.
like in a couple months.
Yep.
And he was-
Microdosing LSD.
No, it would have been psilocybin,
Psilocybin,
and
yep.
some other components. But in that, he then, I spent 3 hours with him talking about microdosing. I'm like, that sounds great. And he goes, hey, I'm doing a ceremony tomorrow with 5-MeO DMT. You want to do it? I'm like, I have no idea what that is. He goes, you're going to love it.
Literally.
But I was open. I was actually, I was being called
Yeah.
to this world. And I jumped in. Ironically enough, I normally do a tremendous amount of research before I do anything.
Yep.
And 3 hours wasn't enough, but there was this calling, and I trusted my intuition.
Yeah.
And I did it.
Yep.
And then the moment I was finished, I was like, holy shit, I think I might have permanent brain damage. And then I go back into a tremendous amount of research, and I was like, holy smokes, I'm in this beautiful space of like epigenetic expression and neuroplasticity.
Yep.
And I get an opportunity to choose to change my life instantaneously.
Yeah.
And I did. And it was
So amazing.
It was unbelievable. Now to then take my years of processing that I had done up to that point, and then to be able to, and I think this is really critical. Like, I think it is hypercritical for you to have this ability to process. And your ability to process then will have a direct impact on your ability to receive during a ceremony.
100%.
And I think it's the greatest mistake people make in ceremonies, fact of doing plant medicine, because if you're doing it in a backyard, like, you're asking for problems. And I think what you do before, more important than the
Preparation
ceremony
or the
itself.
dieta, and then the process afterwards.
Yeah.
I agree with you, and I'm a huge fan of the plant medicine space, and I've seen so many people get tremendous breakthrough in their life.
Yeah.
My concern with it is, in most things, there are seekers who come in looking for the experience, but then have no interest in actually doing the work or integrating.
Yep.
And then that isn't helpful for you, and it's a poor example, right? It's, if you're doing it to get the work done, and I don't know, I've yet to see anyone who's literally physically been addicted to psychedelics, because it's not really how they work. But if you have a different opinion, I'd love to hear it. But people do get addicted to chasing experience and looking for God in psychedelics, which for me, psychedelics can help you heal, it can help you integrate, to get whole, but hopefully it pulls you back to, I don't need this in order to see God, to communicate with God. But it reminds you that he's always there. She's always there, whatever your frame is.
Absolutely.
So, but I love that you did that. And somehow I'm not surprised. I thought that story was coming too. And 5-MeO is wild. I had a very similar experience where it was out of intuition. I didn't do a lot of research. I did it. It was incredible. I don't know if I'll ever do it again, but I had a very positive experience with it.
Yeah, that's amazing. But it was the turning point for me of trusting my intuition.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I knew I was supposed to do it. I knew I was called there for that reason, and I actually accepted it. And it was the first time in my adult life that I accepted my intuition. And from that moment forward, I now guard it, and I'm vigilant about not only protecting it, but cultivating it, curating.
What do you do for those who are listening? Because I think I said this multiple times through Quantum, and we were talking about this, but my first instruction for someone is always to learn to listen to their voice first, right? And if you go to a spiritual teacher, whether it be a pastor or a spiritual reader or a psychic or whoever, if they tell you something that is not in alignment energetically with what you hold to be true or what you think you should do, I always get asked about that. I would say, listen to yourself first. Otherwise, you're training yourself to get advice, to trust something outside of yourself, right? Which doesn't mean you're always right, because you may very well get great advice from somebody, you're just not ready to hear it. Well, you're going to discover that through listening to your own voice if you seek truth and you're in awareness, right? But you want to learn how to trust your own intuition first. To me, that's core. Teaching people how to be free is learn how to listen to this voice first. Then it's easy to hear and be in community of people who are speaking truth. But if you don't get this right, everything else gets trickier.
Amen to that. So to me, there's a distinction in that. And again, this is funny. Like, this is the many roads to Rome, right? I think there's a lot of ways to get awareness. For me, because of my background, It's like through the body. I do this ground up, inside out approach. And for me, the voice is the collective consciousness of my body speaking to me from a sensory acuity perspective. And this is where, like,
It's incredible.
I take my clients, and it's like, my goal is to get them to drop back into their body and have a relationship with their body so that they can listen to their body, because that is where the gold is. That is where the universe, God, source, whatever you want it to be called, is speaking to you moment by moment. And when we tap into our body, that gives us the greatest opportunity to really be the antenna to what is present in this now moment, which then allows us to make better decisions and work and operate in this place of ease and effortlessness and flow. And that is the thing that, that's the thing I fight for.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I look at the body like a vehicle, right? And a vehicle has lights in it, indicator lights that's trying to tell you something.
Yes.
And a lot of us, it's like it's like the person who's driving on needs to change oil, right? And the oil light's on the entire time. And then the car seizes up one day and they're like, what happened to my car? Like, well, how long has that light been on?
Right.
Like, as long as I can remember. Well, that's the problem. Your body's kind of like that. It's trying to communicate with you. It's trying to tell you things. We're just not listening.
Exactly.
So what would you say? You're going to make a comment?
I was, and I just want to share this, like, go back to me being the measurable for my clients. I wasn't the measurable for myself.
Yeah.
And what allows you to be the measurable for yourself is now, instead of focusing on external feedback mechanisms, the Fitbit, the Oura Ring, the Whoop, the ResMed sleep device, whatever, is to start listening to yourself.
Yeah.
And getting clear on what is your body trying to tell you, because your body doesn't lie. Like, it has a
connected
message
to it. It will tell you.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of QS devices. I use Aura. I use my ring. But for me, it's like one of the things I started doing was guessing my score and before looking at it, so that I could get that feedback without needing the device.
Well played.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the key, because what most people do is they outsource their ability to do it to the device, and now they become
detached again, where they're needing a external device to tell them, I'm going to have a good day or I'm going to have a bad day based on.
And that's why, like, to me, all those devices are based on an algorithm, and that algorithm isn't. That algorithm has been normalized to a population, not to you.
Totally.
And so your numbers just might be skewed enough to where they're really not accurate, and so it may not be a great indicator of where you really are at today. And this is why, like, you have to listen. You have to create that relationship with yourself so that you become that measurable for yourself, 100%. Right?
Yeah, and I think that, and for me at least, I wouldn't say that QS is an important quantified self, right?
Yeah.
Using devices to do it, because even if it is an algo that's based on a larger population of people, just the fact that you start measuring something is going to help you become more body aware, right?
With yes and no, but yes, like, I love those devices. I'm a huge fan of those devices. I think it's critical to the point where you're utilizing it to be able to get more confirmation of what you are actually feeling.
And here would be the application. Maybe your score is low. Oh, your readiness score is low, but you feel great. Yeah. Pay attention to how you feel more than the score.
Correct.
The opposite. Score says your readiness is fantastic, and you're like, I don't feel fantastic. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to what your body is saying more than the device.
Well
right?
said.
Get connected to who you are, but use it. These are all tools until they become your master. Don't let them become your master. Let them be tools that are more for confirmation, like we were just talking about.
And that, what you just said, don't let them become your master. That goes with
everything.
Everything
outside of yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And even within yourself, because you can make your ego your master. Reality is, it's like, what's serving you the best right now?
So a couple of things. Somebody to get them back in their body. One of my favorite things to do, and I take clients through, which is pretty simple, is yoga.
Yep.
Right? Yoga.
Yeah.
I've had men and women like literally start tearing up and have somatic release and emotional release in their body through yoga, because it's connecting mind and body.
Absolutely.
What things would somebody who is kind of resonating what you're saying here and wanting to get back into their body, what practices or tools could they use to do that? That's anybody could do.
I'm going to say this just real quick. I've got this 11-minute routine that activates the joints, activate the muscles, and activates the nervous system. That process of attuning yourself to the different parts of your body helps you bring you back to the body. Now, you don't
have it
have
online? Is it recorded?
It's online, yeah.
You can find it on YouTube?
Not on YouTube yet.
We'll post links
that.
to wherever it's at, so people who are interested, they can go find your video.
Sure. But the point being is, if you start to think about that process, I think of it as a triangle, right? The skeletal system, the muscular system, and the nervous system. If you think about what all three of those systems do, it's movement.
Yep.
And for me, any movement, whether it's walking, whether it's running, whether it's swimming, whether it's hiking, whether it's cycling, whatever it is, if you can start to get back into movement, but when you do the movement, you attune yourself back into your body. And this is where I'm a big, and I want to be really clear. If you go to the gym and you see me at a gym and I'm on a bike and I'm reading a book, I'm not working out. I want to be really clear about that. That is not a workout for me.
I don't understand how people do that.
It is. I'm not riding a bike to work out. I'm riding a bike to
keep your body physically,
increase the blood flow to my brain so that whatever I read, I retain.
Well, there's good science to that too.
But yeah, absolutely.
So
and
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
When I'm in the gym working out and moving my body, that is all I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm not
There's
trying
people that
to
listen to an audiobook or a
multitask.
podcast. I'm like, how do you do that? I cannot.
Well, it's not. And for me, I think you're doing yourself a disservice because you are not focused on what the intent of the movement is.
Yeah.
And like when you're focused on the movement, that's the fastest way to get back into your body.
And I have found in my own experience, especially in weightlifting, if I focus on very specifically the muscle I'm trying to isolate in the movement, I get a much better pump and a much better workout. Just by visualizing or feeling physically, okay, I'm working out my pecs, my pectoral muscles, or my lats, or my glutes. I'm like, right, if I'm doing deadlifts and I'm trying to focus on my glutes and my hammies, it's like, well, I will literally focus on those muscle groups to make sure they're the ones feeling the load, not my lower back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to get into semantics here, but there's this piece of high intensity training that is such a misnomer, because if you really want to be attuned to what you're doing, if you load your body up with weight, it's an impossibility to not be focused on what you're doing.
That's been my experience.
And that's why I like higher intensity work for multiple reasons. One, because of focus and your attention, and two, because of the biochemical response that occurs to the body in that space, and the neurological response that happens. So not only do you create more vitality, you create more virility, but you create vigor in it. And when you can combine those together, you can become unstoppable from that perspective.
That's been my experience. I've been doing it for 10 years, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
For health reasons. So who, at this point in your career, who are you serving? What are you focusing on? And who is a good candidate for your kind of services?
Yeah, so we're
just wrapping it up here, but I want to add just a few points here at the end. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, no, thank you. This has been a treat. I have professional athletes that I work with. I have executives that I work with.
Who comes to you? Normally, what are they looking for?
So the only people that come to me are referred. For my one-on-one, you only can work with me if you get referred. And so it would be.
But what are they looking for?
Yeah, great question. There's a mix. I have people that come to me to try to get out of pain. I have people that come to me that are looking to become unburdened mentally and emotionally. I have people that come to me for leadership, that they want to become better leaders. I have people that come to me because they want more capacity to be able to work either longer, for harder and longer, or they want to be able to do more in less time. That would be kind of the crux of the people that come to me. So like searching for that 1%, if you would. And quite honestly, with the people I work with, I'd say it's really like 0.1% or 0.01%, like that little bit extra, because they know that there's more.
Yep.
And they want more.
Yep.
They just don't quite know how to get it. And and they're aware enough to understand that they're doing all these great things, but they're still not operating at the level that they really truly know is possible.
Yep.
So from a one-on-one perspective, I'd say that's who I work with. I have this group of people that I work with that are aspiring to be that level, and that would be more of a group setting, if you would. I think that answered your question. I think I'm missing something, but
Where can people find you?
Find me. Probably the easiest way would be social media, Instagram, Coach Tim Adams, # Coach Tim Adams. My website's coachtimadams.com. Pretty much Coach Tim Adams. You could probably find me in most places. And the reality is I am just stepping into creating a platform. I've literally been the
offline because you're
secret.
Yeah, because your niches have been 1,500 people,
right.
Which makes sense. And I was really excited to get you on because I'm seeing this more and more places where people have become highly specialized, have served a small group of people, and now are bringing their gifts to the world and opening it up for more people. Yeah. And there's more connection and proximity and power, right? Like you get those things connected, and I think there's a work that's being done here. So this has been a joy. We will have another chat. Yeah. There's a lot of other questions. We could probably go on for another hour easy. Just really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to having you on again.